The tragic tale of the Richardson family murders shattered the peaceful image of Medicon Hat, Alberta. At the center of this shocking crime was a 12-year-old girl, Jasmine Richardson, who became entangled in a forbidden relationship with 23-year-old Jeremy Sankey, a man with a troubled past and dark obsessions. This is the story of how a rebellion can go deadly wrong, of manipulation that can be spun out of control, lives tragically cut short. Most chillingly, it reminds us how easily the darkness in human nature comes to the fore and how superficially ordinary the lives can look while they host turmoil beyond our imagination. Together, they hatched a plan, one that will leave an entire family dead and a community reeling with sadness and horror. What would make a teenage girl and her far older boyfriend commit such a heinous crime? How can love, or what they perceive, do? Love becomes so derailed to cause destruction. In this tragic case, we will examine what led up to the murders, what came afterward, and the questions that still linger for those who remember the Richardson family. Medicon Hat, Alberta was a quiet town where neighbors waved to one another. Kids rode bikes, and weekends were marked by block parties and backyard barbecues. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to go wrong until 2006, when a crime so horrifying it shook the entire nation and changed everything. The Richardson family looked to be the very portrait of a typical suburban family in Medicon Hat, Alberta. The Richardson family made it known to their community as a very affectionate and close family. Mark Richardson worked for the oil industry. His occupation was a tough one, where he used his due diligence to perform his job and make a comfortable living for his family. He was as dedicated to his job as he was to his family. His wife, Deborah Richardson, was a stay-at-home mom. Her warm and amiable nature made her very popular with the neighbors and friends. She was actively involved in the lives of her two kids, volunteering at their school and making sure all their needs were well taken care of. The couple's two children brought different dynamics into the home. Jacob is the youngest at 8 years old, and what a real bubbly and carefree boy he was. He loves to play with friends, is fond of drawing, and spends hours glued to his favorite cartoons. His innocence combines with such fresh energy that it makes the home of the Richardson family laugh and lighten up with joy. Jacob is the type of little boy who can brighten up any room with smiles. The family had a 12-year-old daughter named Jasmine, who was at another stage of life trying to negotiate the conflicts of adolescence. Like many preteens, she was trying to work out her identity and quest for independence. Jasmine was always bright and inquisitive. However, with her increasing attraction to goth, subculture changes in her were becoming more marked. She was gradually becoming more withdrawn and belligerent, testing boundaries with her parents. Her interests in dark clothing, alternative music, and edgy online communities began to concern Mark and Deborah. At first they dismissed it as a phase, the normal emanation of some rebellion in a teenager, but Jasmine's increasingly pugnacious personality and mood swings since then had suggested to them that more than mere acting out was going on. Though they were concerned by the changes in Jasmine's behavior, the Richardsons were and would remain a close family with Mark and Deborah, working hard to provide a stable and nurturing environment for their children. They felt that patience and understanding would eventually guide Jasmine back onto a positive path. They set boundaries while trying to encourage open communication to bridge the gap that they as a family seemed to be forming from their daughter to outsiders. The Richardson family looked like a perfect family, a model of suburban harmony. Their house was filled with laughter and warmth, along with the normal ups and downs of family life. But beneath the surface, tensions were quietly building. Jasmine's independence and acts of defiance caused her to clash with her parents and create a fracture that would ultimately have tragic consequences. The cheerful presence of Jacob only compounded the innocence of what was to come next. His playful spirit and close bond with his family made the Richardson tragedy even more devastating, and how this ostensibly ordinary family story would go on to reveal in a fashion nobody could think of, stun a community, and leave the nation in reeling shock at a truth that hardly seemed believable. This is the life of Jasmine Richardson, which took a dark turn when she met Jeremy Steiny, a 23-year-old man who, like her, was into the goth subculture. The two had met through mutual acquaintances and over online forums dedicated to their shared interests. It wasn't long before their connection really heated up. fueled by a common impulse for transgressive thrill-seeking and an attraction to the darker elements of life. What was most alluring to Jasmine was Jeremy's theatrical character. His thick black eyeliner and wardrobe full of black, along with his weird assertion of being a 300-year-old werewolf, made him so mysterious, and therefore greatly magnetic for her. Jeremy came from a troubled background marked by abandonment and relentless bullying. These early experiences shaped his rebellious persona, one that glorified darkness and defied societal norms to Jasmine. He was mysterious and exciting, a stark contrast to her structured suburban life. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Jasmine's relationship with Jeremy became very intense very quickly, in spite of the fact that he was much older than her, and also exhibited quite a few red flags to Jasmine. Jeremy would soon become more than just a love interest. He became a confidant, a partner in rebellion. He listened to her talking about her parents, about being misunderstood, validated her frustration with them, feeding into the growing feeling of estrangement from them. His control over her grew with each passing day. When Mark and Deborah Richardson found out their daughter was involved with Jeremy, they were horrified. The age gap alone was disturbing enough. But more than that, it was Jeremy's creepy persona and the power he had over Jasmine that really worried them, firm in their resolve to protect their daughter. They put strict rules in place, forbade her from seeing Jeremy, and watched everything she did closely. Mark and Deborah hoped these steps would sever the toxic connection and get Jasmine back on a healthier path, but these only made them more alienated from their daughter. Jasmine was going through teen-age rebellion, and the image of her parents came out as people who were going to obstruct her path toward happiness, rather than discouraging her. Their restrictions bonded her even more to him, and the couple started to develop a dangerous mentality that defined Mark and Deborah as the people who were out to thwart their love and freedom. Jeremy's influence over Jasmine slowly turned dark as they fed each other's resentment toward her family. Their mutual fixation on gothic themes and rebellion against society warped into a twisted justification for growing contempt, because they dreamt of a life free from all controls placed upon them by Jasmine's home. They stepped into something a lot darker, a lot more sinister. What started out as a teenage rebellion took a much darker turn, no longer an uneasy alliance between Jasmine and Jeremy. This became the very fuel for the fire that is going to shock the entire community, leaving a scar on those who know and deal with the Richardsons. Forbidden by Jasmine's parents, the young lovers had to resort to secrecy to stay in touch. The connection they shared was torrid, a joint rebellion of sorts which intensified in the shadows. Email, text messaging, and instant online chats kept them alive with each other, without her parents finding out. Mark and Deborah Richardson. These clandestine exchanges became a space where their frustrations and dark fantasies took root, eventually spiraling into a chilling plot. Jeremy, with his taste for the dramatic and the sinister in language coming together with Jasmine's fascination with rebellion, was the kind of catalyst that would further escalate the situation. He validated her anger against her parents, suggesting to her that they were not standing up to him out of an illegitimate concern against their love. The digital trail they left behind is a horrifying descent into delusions, where their conversations began to revolve around the idea of eliminating those that were in their way. What began as teenage venting soon turned sinister as their conversations evolved into real plans for murder. One particular email exchange stands out as especially chilling. Jasmine allegedly wrote, "I have this plan. It starts with me killing them and ends with me living with you." The chill in her words, the ice in her tone left no doubt as to her state of mind. Far from trying to dissuade her, Jeremy threw his arms open wide and embracing the idea of himself as a willing accomplice, who would stop at nothing just to be able to stay with her. He boasted about his ability to get ready and commit murder, that his words blended fantasy with intent. This joint delusion had nurtured and grown in every communication while feeding on each other's darker thoughts. Their fantasies developed in their lives over time and gained weight with every passing instance. Soon enough they became so substantial that their plan seemed very much like something real. Methods were discussed. followed by timing and what actions the girls would take when executing their dreary plans. Jeremy was true to form, using fascination with Gothic themes and violence as part of his identity. He armed himself with a knife, a chilling prelude to the horrifying events to come with this couple. It was no longer the passing thought of murdering Jasmine's family, worked out in every detail, an event the couple convinced themselves would finally free them from authority. The date was set, April 22, 2006, in their twisted minds. That day would mark the beginning of their life together. It was to be that evening when they would massacre the Richardson family, thus freeing Jasmine from what she felt was controlling her, and to live with Jeremy without interference. The finality and resolve in their planning brings into sharp relief the great depths to which they had sunk into their shared fantasy. As the day approached, the horrifying nature of their intentions became clearer and clearer. A relationship that had seemed to be grounded in the typical angst of a teenager wanting independence had transformed into something unimaginably dark to the Richardson family. April 22nd would bring an end to an ordinary suburban life, but also an end to all that they had built together. Shocking tragedy, born from toxic and delusional love. The Richardson household was unusually quiet on the night of April 22, 2006. Inside, Mark and Deborah Richardson were settling in for a typical evening with no idea of the terror that would soon descend upon them. Their once happy family home, full of laughter, and the ordinary sounds of life which soon become a house of butchery outside Jeremy. Steiny approached the house armed and resolute, ready to put into effect a horrific plan hashed in secret. Outside, an all-too-willing 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson waited for him as the nightmare began to unfold. Jeremy entered the house with his intention quite obvious and his weapon at the ready. His first contact was with Deborah, the matriarch of the family. She, realizing the menace that was standing in front of her, fought back with everything she could muster. Her maternal instinct screamed for her to do everything possible to safeguard her family. The struggle was desperate, but Jeremy's attack was savage and relentless. Bravely as she fought, Deborah was no match and fell to his viciousness. The commotion roused Mark, who came rushing to the scene to help his wife. He found her under attack and tried to intervene, but Jeremy's onslaught was just as merciless. Mark, with all his strength and determination, was no match for the ferocity of the attack, and he too fell at the hands of Jeremy's relentless violence. The loss of both parents in such a horrific manner sent the Richardson home into chaos and despair. Amid the chaos, 8-year-old Jacob hid in his bed, clutching whatever he could find to comfort him. Frightened and disoriented, the sounds of violence must have been unimaginable to the young boy, who probably hoped that by remaining silent, he would be spared. But Jeremy showed no mercy at all. He hunted down Jacob and killed the young boy in an act so pointless and brutal. It highlighted the depravity of the night witnesses, and later investigators reported that Jasmine either actively assisted or at the very least helped to enable Jeremy in the murder of Jacob. The extent of her involvement added another layer of horror to an already unimaginable crime. By the time the bloodshed had stopped, the Richardson home was one of unimaginable carnage. The walls and floors were soaked in blood, an unnatural stillness. Silence settled over the house. The warmth and love that had once filled this family environment were transformed into a house of horror in a matter of hours. The sheer violence of the crime left even experience against investigators shaken, and with the murders, Jasmine and Jeremy fled, and in that flight, left the shattered remains of a family and their actions. 3 lives were taken from those who had every right to live them, along with any semblance of a sense of community safety, and normally from a symbol of suburban stability. The Richardson family became a cautionary tale for all that knew them, the epicenter of tragedy. It was to be a threshold night of darkness, marking no turning back, with so many questions still unasked, and an overall feeling of loss seeping in. It was the next morning when peace in this quiet suburban neighborhood was shattered, as a boy came to the Richardson home to play with his best friend Jacob. No one answered when he rang the front doorbell. Curiosity got the better of him, and he peered through a window, and what he saw would forever haunt him inside the bloodied bodies of Mark and Deborah. Richardson lay motionless. The scene was ghastly, an unbelievable sight for anyone, let alone a child. Terrified, he fled to wake his parents up. They immediately dialed the police. What police found when they arrived at the Richardson home was a scene of unthinkable carnage. Blood covered the walls and the floor. The gruesome pictures told of the terrible violence that had taken place that night as the officers further entered the house. They found Mark and Deborah's dead bodies in the living room, and an 8-year-old boy. Jacob was found dead on the floor in his bedroom. The brutality of the crime left even veteran officers shaken. Initially, the fact that 12-year-old Jasmine was missing led to fears of abduction. Police believed she might have been kidnapped by the killer, possibly another victim of that heinous crime. An Amber Alert was considered as investigators scrambling to piece together what had happened, but as they scoured the scene for evidence, their suspicions began to shift. But the discovery of Jasmine's belongings, complete with disturbing messages exchanged with an older man, Jeremy Steiny, painted a far more sinister and disturbing picture. And the more the investigators dug, the more they found emails, social media messages, and exchanges of text between Jasmine and Jeremy that alluded to their sinister plan. They had discussed their mutual fantasies of murder and a plan to kill anyone who would come between them. It became all the more obvious that Jasmine was no victim, but an active accomplice in the crime. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Jeremy had left the crime scene and driven a few miles to a town where they were to hide from police. They went into hiding at some friend's place who did not have any idea about the killings. People in that place stated later that the couple were carrying on as if nothing had happened. They were photographed laughing, holding hands, and kissing, their carefree demeanor a chilling testimony to their detachment from the atrocities they had committed. Most unnerving was their lack of remorse. This fact underlined even more the warped dynamic between these two. Their attempts at hiding did not last long. Within 24 hours. Police, using witness reports and evidence from the crime scene, tracked them down. The couple was arrested, and their cold-blooded plot came to a jarring stop. That Jasmine was involved added another layer to an already inexplicable and shocking tragedy in the eyes of the community. The Richardson murders was a story that continued to enthrall and horrify, an incident whose chilling evidence told of how innocence could swiftly slip into darkness. The trial following the gruesome murders of Jasmine's family members made national headlines, being one of the most disturbing criminal cases. In recent decades, it touched off debate after debate over the nature of youth involvement in violent crimes and the responsibilities of adults in influencing minors. Jasmine, only 12 years of age at the time of the murders, was tried under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. This law entitles her, because of age, to particular protections. Nonetheless, she was put on trial just like any adult for her actions in a court of law. Because Jeremy was aged 23 years, he too was tried as an adult. The full weight of the law bore down upon him. Prosecutors at trial painted a chilling narrative of the perverse relationship that Jasmine and Jeremy shared, portraying a picture of a young girl who was more than just an active participant in the ruthless scheme and planning that went into the cruel murder. The prosecution described how Jeremy had coldly manipulated Jasmine, using his control over her to get her to go along with the murders of her own family members. They said that though young Jasmine was well aware of the seriousness of her acts and bore equal responsibility for the murders, the killings had been harrowing in their details, and prosecutors insisted that this was a case of premeditated murder, not some spontaneous act of violence. In contrast, the defense team endeavored to emphasize the vulnerability of Jasmine at 12 years of age and argued that she was easily influenceable by an older, more experienced individual like Jeremy. They claimed that Jasmine had been brainwashed and forced to commit the murders. Therefore, she was not actually aware of what she was doing or fully realizing the gravity of the action she had committed. The defense depicted Jeremy as a manipulative individual who had exploited the naivety and emotional immaturity of Jasmine to use her trust for his own evil deeds. They urged the court to take her age and the very real likelihood that she had been led astray into account, being incapable of making decisions for herself as the trial developed. So did the evidence against both defendants' testimony from witnesses, forensic evidence, and a deep look into the relationship between the couple painted a picture of a pattern of manipulation and control by Jeremy. The defense of brainwashing wasn't enough to convince the jury that Jasmine's participation in the murders was more than just being under the influence of another. She had been an active participant in the planning, execution, and aftermath of the killings. leaving no doubt that she was criminally responsible. Finally, the court gave its verdict. Jasmine was pronounced guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. While her youthfulness had to be taken into consideration during the sentencing, her actions were by far too severe in nature for her to be let off with an easy sentence. So she was sentenced to the maximum penalty possible for a juvenile: 10 years in a youth detention facility, including 4 years spent in a psychiatric facility and 4 years under conditional supervision. Meanwhile, Jeremy got the toughest possible sentence: 3 consecutive life sentences without chance of parole for 25 years. The sentence was reflective of the heinous nature of the crimes. But in many ways, the fact that Jeremy was central to all of this, bringing the other 2 into it through his manipulative ways when she was released in 2016. Jasmine was given complete anonymity to protect her privacy and to help her adjust to life outside the institution she has under a new identity. Reportedly started Aresh away from the glare of the public eye that had followed her case for years. Her release marked the end of a legal odyssey that had drawn widespread national attention and stirred a wide debate to many. Her case is one of rehabilitation and redemption, ion to the possibility of reform by young offenders. In appropriate circumstances, her supporters point out that she did serve her full sentence time in a psychiatric facility, plus completing all requirements for conditional supervision. Without incident to them, she is a case study in how the justice system can give second chances, more so for the young, who might have been coaxed or otherwise induced into committing acts that are heinous. Others will, however, not agree with this. To the critics, giving Jasmine a new identity and a second chance at leading a normal life does not quite balance the enormity of her crimes. They wonder whether justice was ever really served for the family whose members' lives she violently snuffed out. Her anonymity felt like insulation from accountability, and critics thought it set bad precedents, undermining the seriousness of what she had done. It gives evidence to a deeper debate over the young injustice that is chances for rehabilitation. How to strike a balance in considering on one end the shielding of vulnerable offenders and on the other end, justice for the victims, often cited as an example. Her case is almost always hotly debated in the debate over the moral and utility of sentencing minors for violent crimes. While this may be Jeremy's story, he himself remains in prison, serving the brunt of his sentence: 3 life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. Jeremy's case differs from Jasmine's in one major respect: his identity has never been concealed, and so he often figures as the aggressor in these tragic events. His part in the crime has often been examined to explain a kind of relationship that seems to deteriorate into an inexplicable downward spiral. The influences of Jeremy upon Jasmine. His background, his motives had been a subject of psychological studies and media analysis. His story will always serve to remind one to give an example of the worst that unbridled manipulation and dysfunctional dynamics can unleash when allowed to culminate in unbelievable acts of violence. To many, Jeremy epitomizes the dark side of relationships, in which control and manipulation supplant trust and respect. His ongoing incarceration, to some, serves as a form of protection from doing harm to others. But his case does bring up questions as to how much more could have been helped by mental health intervention and what the responsibilities of society are in trying to halt these kinds of behaviors before they grow into tragedy. In a nutshell, the case of Jasmine and Jerry continued to echo and served as a social research into the crime, justice, and problem of human behavior. Their case went on to show the complexity in criminal justice, especially for minors, how shocking it was to remind them of the far-reaching consequences of violence and toxic relationships. The Richardson family murders are the icy reminder of how a life that appears quite normal can plunge so quickly and unexpectedly into tragedy, too terrible to be imagined. This case, extremely disturbing, places us face to face with questions that are not easy to deal with, pointing to the dark side of love manipulation and human relationships' thin veneer. It flags how dangerous toxic dynamics can spiral into catastrophic consequences, even within a family that appeared on the surface to be loving and stable. The case of Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steiny shook the very foundation of the small community of Medicine Hat, Alberta, and was felt far and wide even today. What really set this case apart, however, was the especially heinous nature of the murders and the extreme youth of those involved. Jasmine was but a 12-year-old girl at the time, Few cases in the history of Canadian true crime have had such a significant impact. It exposed vulnerabilities of youth to manipulation, while also touching on very difficult questions of culpability, rehabilitation, and justice to the people of Medicon Hat. The murders are more than a sad chapter in their history. They're a ghostly reminder of how fragile trust can be and how devastating the consequences can be. Once that trust is broken, the case, even years later, still sparks an outrage reaching far beyond the town's borders, drawing in and unsettling all who hear about it. The Richardson family murders highlight the complexities of human behavior and the far-reaching impact of violence on individuals, families, and communities. The Richardson family murders are a case in point as to the very many intricacies of human behaviors and just how far, in what measure, violence may ripple through individual persons, families, and communities. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.